Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you all. This is By Hook or By Needles. I am Sam, and this is gonna, I hope, be a shortish video, but it's an important precursor video to my next video, and that's someone dropping something next door, metallic. Sorry about that, if you heard it. Life happens, I don't edit. There you go. What I'm going to show you today, I have mentioned and shown on my Knitting for Beginners videos as in the, I think it's in the increases video. But I want to concentrate solely on one type of increase, or what is usually used as an increase, but is not used as an increase in the format that I will be using it in my next video. Now, some of you might have already seen my Brioche in one color video, which does use yarn overs. That's what this video is all about, yarn overs, and how you can create this really thick, squishy, soft, stretchy fabric that's really drapey and beautiful. This is Brioche in one color. My goal is to show you in the next video Brioche in two colors. It's exactly the same. It's nice and stretchy. It's very thick and it's very squishy and it's very warm. And in my opinion, it's very beautiful, except for the edges, which I will discuss more in the actual Brioche video. But the edges, to me, are always a problem on Brioche. I can only really get the edges to look neat and nice when I've worked with fingering weight. And other than that, it comes out like this. But I do have a solution, which I will be showing in the next video, which this video is a precursor for. So, if you want to learn how to do this, you can see it's reversible. Blue is predominant on one side, or dominant on one side, and pink is dominant on the other side. So, if I'm a little bit off with my words and speech, I apologize. I don't know how to explain it other than to just say medication, and we'll leave it at that. Anyway, yeah, so yarn overs. What is a yarn over and why is it important in Brioche? Well, yarn over in Brioche is the way that you sort of get your double-sidedness. It's the way that you get this raised bump and this divot and raise, you know, appearance. But unlike this swatch, now this swatch, when I show people how to do this, all the stitches both ways were knitted. It was knit every row. Every row was a knit. With the Brioche in two colors, you have to do purl rows as well. Excuse me, I have to cough. Okay, that's better. Sorry about that. That's the only time I edit, but I'm not actually editing. I'm just pausing because iPhone finally got a brain and upgraded, or iOS upgraded the iPhones so that when we use a camera, we can pause. Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing. What was I saying? Yeah, no. Oh, purling. Okay, so you do need a purl on these. Now, as I discussed in the previous rows, in previous video on Brioche, which I will link below, the knit stitches in Brioche are called barks. And that's just simply an adaptation used because Nancy Merchant, however you want to say her name, who is like the guru of Brioche, uses the and I don't know if she was the first. She was the first that I've noticed. I've noticed everyone since her, most of them use BRK, which means brioche knit. BR for brioche, K for knit. So all they did is they slipped an A in there and they called a brioche knit a bark rather than a BRK. It's just quicker to say, presumably. Now, a BRP is a brioche purl, and they call them burps. So you've got barks and burps. So you will need to know how to do the brioche purl in this two-color fashion. Now, having said that, because you're doing a brioche purl, the yarn over will be slightly different for your brioche or your brioche purl stitches or for your burps. Okay, and that is why we're discussing yarn overs today. Okay, so I've just knitted a few rows garter stitch just so that you know, I had some stitches on my needle, and I'm going to show you the two forms of yarning over. So when we're knitting and you see something which is YO in capital letters, that is a yarn over. Now, it really, really depends on what you're making, what stitch you've been knitting, as to how you do the yarn over. Now, let me see if I can find, I should have been more organized, shouldn't I? But then that would not be any fun. And that would be just so unlike me to actually, hang on, have I got an envelope? Yes, I'll use this back of this envelope. Okay, cool. All right, and a pen. So we've got BRKs, sorry the desk is wobbling, which are our barks, which are our brioche knits. We've got our well actually it's done BRP, I think, like that. And that's our burps, which are our brioche pearls. Okay, so, oh, coffee stain, oh no, sticky. All right, so we've got those. You will see these a lot in a lot of brioche patterns, along with many, many, many new and wonderful shortcuts. Now, you will also see yarn over. Yarn over is used sometimes in brioche and sometimes not in brioche, which we all know to mean yarn over. Yarn over what, you might ask? If you were a crocheter, you'd think it was yarn over, you know, your hook, which is right. And it's also the same in knitting. It's yarn over your needle. But there's lots of ways you can do yarn overs. And there's lots of ways they can write yarn overs. With brioche, when you see a pattern, you will see it will say slip 1. Sometimes it would say yarn over, slip 1 with yarn over. And sometimes it will say slip 1 with, hang on, I should do the abbreviation, shouldn't I? With yarn in front. Now, effectively, if you're slipping a stitch with the yarn in front, you are doing a yarn over. So it's a different way of saying there's exactly the same thing. And this is where you need this yarn over video. And this is why I'm doing a yarn over video, as boring as it will seem. We also, in brioche, they will do, you will slip stitches with yarn in back. So you have to move your yarn to the back. And it means, this means, still not always a yarn over. It depends on the stitch. But this is where it can get confusing. And I know this is where people do get lost with brioche. And that is why I'm going to show you step by step through the brioche 2-color in my next video. But I really want you to understand the different terminologies and ways that yarn overs are talked about. With yarn in back can also be yarn over needle. That can also be a yarn over. It can also be yarn around needle. Or, actually, no, it's not yarn round needle, sorry. It's yarn round needle, which literally does mean yarn round needle. And that is a slightly different to your yarn over. To really simplify it, and this is really sort of simplifying it because it doesn't always stand, because it depends on whether they want you to increase a stitch or not increase a stitch in the case of brioche or whatever it might be. In brioche, a yarn over or yarn round needle or yarn over needle or a with yarn in front or a with yarn in back, none of these are increases. It's important to understand that. Their increases are crazy. No, I'm not going to go into it because it'll just get you lost. And this has probably already gotten you lost. So, and I've already forgotten what I was going to say. Right, yarn around. Oh, that's what I was going to say. A yarn over is usually made before a knit stitch to produce the yarn over or an increase. Okay, so a yarn over is used prior to you making a knit stitch. A yarn over needle or a yarn round needle is usually produced prior to making a purl stitch. Now this is important because if you were to put a yarn over in front of a purl stitch, what effectively you're doing with a yarn over when you do it in front of a knit stitch is increasing or adding a loop onto your needles. You're adding a loop, you're going over, yarn over. And that will only be the case if you are doing a knit stitch. So like yarn in front, with yarn in front. If you have your yarn in front of your work, if you've watched the previous videos I have on knit stitches and purl stitches, you know that we have our yarn in front of our work when we're making purl stitches only. So if you put your yarn in front and your next stitch is a purl stitch and you work that stitch and you've worked that stitch and your yarn's in front, you're not adding a yarn over. That's where the yarn around needle comes. You've got to take it from the front, around the needle and back to the front to create the loop over. Okay, so that's a lot of terminology to absorb. I really do understand that. Please, please ask me anything you need to in the comments. I will get to it and answer you immediately or as soon as I can if I'm not if I'm sleeping. I know this can be a difficult concept to grasp, especially if you're new to knitting, but I think it can even be difficult. I mean, I've been in a lot of knitting Facebook pages that people who are quite experienced say, look, this is saying yarn over, but it's not adding a stitch, and you know, and I sort of say, okay, is the knit stitch a purl? And they say, yeah. And I say, okay, well, yarn over is not the right terminology. They've used the wrong terminology. They should be saying YRN, which is yarn round needle to you. And I show them pictures that I just sort of got from the internet, and show them the difference. And they're like, oh, well, why don't they say that? And I say, because they just don't. They assume, as a knitter, you understand the difference, that the next stitch will determine whether you yarn over or yarn round. So let's put this into practice. I'm knitting. I've just knit 3 stitches. The yarn is at the back. I am knitting. If I'm going to knit this next stitch, but I want to create a yarn over, I have to put my yarn in the front. With yarn in front is the same as yarn over. And I'll show you what I mean. So I knit the next stitch, and there I have a yarn over. Now, yarn overs are used a lot in lacework, and as you can see, it creates a hole, and that's why it's usually used in lacework. So a yarn over or a yarn in front, and I'll knit just one more, and I'll show you what I mean. So a yarn in front or a yarn over, because your yarn goes over as you make the next stitch. If I slip the next stitch, it's still in front, and then knit the next stitch after that, and you will notice I get a yarn over with a stitch, which is exactly what you would have seen happening in the Brioche knit with one color sample that I showed you a couple of days ago. I can't remember how many days ago. Go and have a look and you will see. So, because that's what you're doing in Brioche. In Brioche, you're adding a loop to one stitch, and then in the next stitch, you're knitting or purling. Okay? So that's your yarn overs. I'm just going to knit to the end. And that's your yarn in front, or with yarn in front, your W-Y-I-F. And the reason why you're probably wondering, why are you confusing us with all these terms? Because if you go and decide you want to pick up a pattern after watching my video tomorrow or whenever it is, I'm just going to purl a roll as well. I want you to understand the terminology that whatever they use, because we don't know what they're going to use. I don't know what they're going to use. You don't know what they're going to use. And it's always nice. I'm just going to make that like that, because I don't want to add stitches really. You don't know what they're going to use, so I'm just going to purl those two together to keep the stitches the same. So to understand all the language used in Brioche helps. Yes, there will be, or there should be, a legend explaining it, but I think also if you can see it visually, it's going to help a lot as well. Okay, I'm going to purl this next row. It is a knit row, but I'm going to purl it. Alright, so we're purling. And the yarn is in front because we are purling. If I need to add a yarn over, I have to go all the way around. See that? Or you can just sort of, with yarn in back. If you put the yarn in back, it's not enough. It's not enough. Because if you go to purl that next stitch, yes, you create a yarn over, but in my opinion, it's not a very good yarn over. You want a better yarn over. So, if you're purling and you need and it says yarn over, they don't mean keep it in the front like they do for knitting. If your next stitch is going to be a purl, you need to go yarn round needle, YRN. And you go around the whole needle. You've created your little yarn over by itself. Then you can purl the next stitch. And again, you know, you'll have a gap. That's for, you know, like if you're doing lace work. It's also known, as I said before, as yarn, can be known as yarn over needle, because you're taking your yarn and you're putting over the needle. But they're not fully explaining it because they're not saying, well, it's still got to come back to the front. Once you've gone over the needle, it has to come back because your next stitch is going to be a purl. So if you need to make a yarn over and your next stitch is a purl, you need to go around the needle. Okay, and then you can purl your next stitch and you get your yarn over. So when we're doing this, our two-color, no, it's not going to focus for me, our two-color brioche, you will be doing yarn overs before you're doing purl, brioche purls, or before you do burps. So what will happen is you'll be doing the same sort of thing as we did here, where we slip one stitch with yarn forward, right, and then we knit the next stitch, and that creates a loop over the needle with a stitch. So if I yarns forward, if I'm going to slip the next stitch and then knit the next stitch as we did before, that adds a yarn over to that stitch. But if I'm going to purl this stitch and I'm going to slip this stitch, I need to yarn around the needle till it comes back to the front to produce the slip, the loop, to the yarn over. Then I slip the next stitch and then I purl the next. I think, how do I normally do it? Normally what I do is I slip the stitch first. Then I go yarn around needle. So now you've got your stitch with your yarn over, and you can purl your next stitch. Oops, split the yarn. Purl the next stitch. So I'll just show that again. I'll just do a purl. So I'm going to slip this one and I'm going to purl this one. So I slip, yarn around needle, and then I'm going to purl that stitch. Now you may need to just watch those few yarn overs and whatever a couple of times to truly understand, but it won't matter. I will go into a little bit of the detail initially when we start doing our yarn overs and yarn rounds, but I really did need to explain more or better the anatomy for this, because when it comes to doing it, I'm going to use different terminology. I might say with yarn forward, with yarn back, yarn over needle, yarn round needle, which is all the sorts of terminology you get when you look at a brioche pattern, because they don't all speak the same language, sadly. It's a bit like speaking, you know, UK terminology and US terminology. We know that there is a difference in the terminologies, so we train our brain to accept that a DC is an SC, and that you know, a DC in the US is a treble in the UK, and that sort of thing. We know that. Well, this is sort of like that. You need to know what the yarn over means. And yeah, you know, personally, if I see yarn over and it's before a purl stitch, it annoys me, because I know what I've got to do, but I also know that anybody who's just picked up some knitting to do this stitch, and they're told to yarn over before a purl stitch, it's not going to work well for them. It's not going to end well for them, and I find that sad, because it's going to put them off knitting. And I'm, you know, wouldn't be surprised if many people, you know, who are listening are thinking the same thing. Yep, that put me off. I couldn't understand where I was going wrong. And that's why it's great to have, you know, I think, a video just about the yarn over. So please ask questions. I will answer as quickly as I can and as simply as I can. I'll try and find, if I can, the pictures that I used to use, if I'm allowed to use them. I don't know if I can. I might just create my own pictures about the difference. But yeah, so yarn overs, not as simple as you might think. Lots of terminology, but effectively they all do the same thing. They add a stitch in increases. They add a hole in lacework, but in brioche they do neither. Yeah, you heard me. It doesn't increase and it does not create a hole. And that's because you knit or purl the stitch with the yarn over. You knit those two together. And that's another piece of terminology that a lot of brioche patterns will, in my opinion, get wrong. Instead of saying a brioche knit or a brioche purl, they will simply say knit two together. Now, if you're an experienced knitter and you see knit two together and you're experienced with brioche, you consider that to be one stitch, because that is one stitch and that is another stitch. So if I saw knit two together, I would knit these two together, and that would be wrong. What they should be saying is you do a BRK, you do a bark, you knit these two together. You're knitting the stitch together. And that's why it doesn't cause an increase, and that is why it does not cause a hole. I hope I've made it as simplified as I can. Like I say, please ask questions if you have any queries, and yeah, and get ready for brioche in 2 colors. Okay, take care, everybody. Remember, learn from the past, think about the future, but always, always live for today. Take care now.